Hello everyone, and welcome back to Hella Gay Podcast. Um, Ash was supposed to record this intro, but we're having technical difficulties with her mic, so you won't be hearing her most of the video. So if you see her mic queuing, please note we recorded this before. We aren't re-recording it 3 times, so screw it. But she does want to state this topic is sensitive for me. It is sensitive for most other people as well, so please, for the love of God, be respectful. And if you're the boys that found our channel from our high school, if you are disrespectful, she will report you to the school board, and you will most likely get expelled and ruin your life. I don't know if they caught that, but she said suck on that. Let's get this started. Future Percy and future Ash out. Let's get right into this. On August 28th, 2018, the National Hurricane Center, or the NHC, began monitoring a tropical wave and an elongated trough of air pressure over Western Africa for possible tropical cyclogenesis within the subsequent 5 days. As it progressed westwards under the influence of easterly trade winds, favorable environment conditions including ample moisture and low wind shear enabled further organization of the wave and the development of broad shower and thunderstorm activity. Though the tropical wave lacked a well-defined low-level circulation center, the NHC began issuing advisories on the system as a potential weather tropical cyclone 6 later that day. As the system was threatening Cape Verde, easterly trade winds propelled disturbance along the west to west northwest trajectory. And that's what it says, along the west to west northwest trajectory. I had to reread that, that's the thing. Toward the end of August 31st, the system's convective organization became sufficient for the NHC to upgrade the disturbance to a Tropical Depression 6, south of Santiago, Cape Verde. While the storm came under the steering influence of a strong subtropical ridge to the north the following day. Moderate wind shear temporarily stunted the development and displaced the convection to the eastern side of the depression. Later, however, pronounced banding features developed around the circulation, prompting the NHC to upgrade the depression to a tropical storm Florence at 0900 Z on September 1st. Developments of the central dense overcast and the mid-level eye feature signified Florence's intensification to the hurricane strength winds early on September 4th. Roughly 1,240 miles, 2,000 kilometers west-northwest of Cape Verde. Shortly thereafter, the system unexpectedly rapidly intensified within the small area of low wind shear in an otherwise adverse upper-level environment. The hurricane's core structure, eye, and outer banding improved markedly, catching forecasters off guard and intensifying beyond model outputs on September 5th. The tropical cyclone reached an initial peak intensity with 1-minute sustained winds of 130 miles an hour, or 215 kilometers an hour, with a central pressure of 950 millibars, or 28 nhg, making it a Category 4 hurricane on the Saffir-Simpson scale. Therefore, increasing wind shear caused the hurricane to rapidly weaken to a tropical storm strength on September 8th, building mid-level ridge halted. Building mid-level ridge halted Florence's northward movement, leading it westward. Florence was initially predicted to hit Wrightsville Beach, North Carolina, at 11:15 a.m. EST on September 14th. Sadly, this was wrong. At 7:15 a.m. EST on September 4th, Florence made landfall just south of Wrightsville Beach, North Carolina, as a Category 1 with sustained winds of 90 miles an hour, 150 kilometers an hour, with a central pressure of 956 mbar, soon rising back up to a Category 4. This is the portion in which my story begins.
This monster hurricane now closes in. At this hour, Florence is a dangerous Category 3 with winds up to 120 miles an hour. And there are a couple of very important factors tonight to bear in mind. First, a remarkable development overnight. The storm track shifting to the south slightly, meaning communities in South Carolina are now preparing for a possible direct hit as well. And Georgia now in the threat zone. This stretches all the way north up to Maryland. And here is the other major concern. They expect Florence to slow down and grow wider and sit here right off the coast. It is now 500 miles across. Astronauts on the space station needed a super wide angle lens to capture it all. And the hurricane is expected to hover right here, thrashing these communities for days. The change in the track tonight has so many families reassessing.
Breaking news as we come on the air tonight. Millions of Americans hunkering down along the Carolina coast, bracing for round one of a multi-day onslaught from Hurricane Florence. The gargantuan storm stretching.
The U.S. eastern seaboard is now feeling the wrath of Hurricane Florence. These are some of the scenes from overnight in North Carolina. Winds of up to 150 kilometers an hour tearing down much in their path. Catastrophic flash flooding, swallowing up streets. Life-threatening storm surge on the coast as well. Florence is about to make landfall in North Carolina now as a Category 1 storm.
I was asleep when Florence hit. I was around 10 years old at the time, and Florence stayed on land, moving very slowly until September 8th, or September 18th. It stayed for 4 days, but my story was far from over. On September 16th, according to my parents, we attempted to make our way out. We packed up 3 vehicles. My grandparents and my uncle were in their vehicle. My mother, my father, and I were in our own vehicle. My sister, whom wishes for her family and her name to remain anonymous, and her husband, with my 2 nephews, were in their vehicle. At the time, my nephews were only 2 and barely a year old. My grandparents, vehicle 1, managed to pack up their stuff first, and my grandfather, being the man he was, didn't want us to come over and say goodbye. He wanted us to avoid getting sick because their yard was flooded, to the point where you could walk over, but you'd get a lot of water on your legs. And mosquitoes at that time, in the warmer months, they would lay eggs in water. So my grandfather didn't want us to get sick from that. So he told us to stay put, and we did. My sister and her family were still packing up their vehicle, so we let my grandparents go first. We waited for my sister to finish packing up, and then we left after them. 10 minutes after they had left the neighborhood. During that 10 minutes, Vehicle 1, my grandparents' vehicle, had made it onto the highway and passed the restricted area. When we got to that area, we did not know they had passed it, and we just saw a state trooper parked by it. We drove up. He told us that was a restricted area and no vehicles were allowed to pass as there was high flood waters in that area, and we drove the opposite way. For a while, we drove, and we drove, until we turned back to head back into Wilmington, after seeing the road was crested, meaning flooding would soon arrive. As we drove back into Wilmington, North Carolina, behind us, my sister's vehicle was driving, but with us. My mom looked out her side, and saw through the mirror my sister's hand waving from the passenger side, signaling us for us to pull over. We did. When we did, she got out, basically jumping from her vehicle, which was still moving at the time, although very slowly, and she ran to my mom's side and said, "Mama's in trouble." My parents were confused, and she further explained through some tears that a current of water had flipped my grandmother's vehicle, and they were upside down. I only remember crying when my father called 911 to advise them and give them the number that my grandmother used to call, in hopes that they could trace it. We went home after that, and the day passed very slowly. My dad tried calling my grandmother multiple times, only for the phone to ring and ring and ring for no one to answer. We'd get a call from the hospital the next morning, inside a different county that was outside of Florence's reach. We were advised that my grandmother and my uncle had made it, but my grandfather and his dog had not. The water had flipped their vehicle, and this comes from a statement my uncle gave me and my parents after the storm had passed and we got back in contact with them, which took us nearly a few months. My uncle had stated that the water had flipped the vehicle, and my grandmother had used her phone to call my sister, as a way to say one last farewell. My sister also stated in the phone that during the phone call she could hear my uncle in the background yelling at my grandmother to be quiet and calm down. When the water had flipped their vehicle, my grandmother knew that they were going to die, but my uncle knew that they would not. He wanted them to survive. My uncle banged on the door, kicked at it, did everything he could to open it. And he did. He pulled my grandmother from the vehicle and then went back to grab my grandfather, but my grandfather fought with him, forcing my uncle to leave him. I remember sitting in the living room of my house, which was diagonal from my grandmother's house in the neighborhood, and my father had walked in to break the news. We'd spend what felt like days mourning, even though it was only a few hours. I remember going to bed that night saying, "I hope this is some prank to my mother." The next day, my sister and her husband went out to grab some food, as the Waffle House down the street was still open. My sister and her husband found out that our front yard, was flooding. And I don't mean a big puddle near the road. It was up to our porch. It was dark out, and we were alone in the neighborhood, so we packed up. My sister and her husband went to our neighbor's yard, which our vehicles were parked at, since our neighbor was out of town, and said we could park our vehicles during the flood, or during the hurricane, since it was a higher ground area. My sister and her husband couldn't get out of the neighborhood in time to get service, but they did manage to call 911, which informed the Cajun Navy. The Cajun Navy is a informal ADHOC volunteer group comprising of private boat owners across America whom assist in search and rescue efforts in the United States, as well as offer disaster relief assistance. The team who saved our lives were experts, comprised of ex-military and ex-fire and rescue operators. At the time, I was short, being only 10 years old, so I was roughly around 5 foot, maybe shorter than that. I had to be carried out, and I remember the group leader said to everyone inside the group. I remember the group leader stating that if one drop of that murky water hits any of these kids, you'll be in trouble, which made me feel better, knowing that he gave them a reason not to let it hit us. I was carried out by a person who was an ex-Marine, and he tried to calm me. He tried calming me with normal chit-chat. He told me that his current occupation was child psychiatric, believe it or not. Well, therapist. That's all he was. Anyways, he asked me what I wanted to do. When I grew up, and I told him I wanted to be in the military. And he was happy. I was happy. After we got to the trucks, which were the lifted Dodge trucks, very high off the ground, he loaded us up into the vehicles. There were 2 trucks. My truck consisted of the group leader, a New York Times writer, my sister, and her 2 kids, my nephews. The other vehicle consisted of my mom, my dad, and my sister's husband. The New York Times writer was told that he would be down here to write about Florence, and he said that he took photos of us during the rescue. My sister asked him not to post a photo of her kids on the internet, which he said he would not, but then he did, which was a bitch move. I remember hearing the group, when we got onto the main road, I remember hearing the group leader's radio that floodwaters were getting above the hoods of their vehicles. Like I said, these vehicles were lifted off the ground pickup trucks. We were taken to a shelter to ride out the next few days of the storm. I found out my dogs had been left in the house, and I begged them to go back. They did. They had to kick down the door of my house as my father had locked it on accident, believing they had already grabbed the puppies. We spent the next few days in one shelter, then had to move to a different shelter because somebody was eyeing my ADHD medicine, presumably a drug addict. We moved back home after that because the storm had ended. We went without power for another month and were stuck under a constant cover of rainfall. It'd take a while for everything to go back to normal. And when school was back in session, I showed up for my first day back, and the school sent me home. Because during that second shelter, my mother had found our school therapist and told him what happened. And he told the principal of the school that same story, who granted me a 1-month pass from all school activity and work to mourn the loss of my grandfather. We found his body. We held his funeral. And that same day, after the funeral was over, a group of paramedics who were driving down the highway had found my grandfather's dog. They called us after with the number that was provided on the caller and let us know they buried the dog where they found her in her final resting place. It's been 6 years since Florence devastated the Carolinas, from all the way up in Maryland down to Georgia, even parts of Florida. Florence was so big that the International Space Station had to use a wide view lens just to take a photo of it. Many still haven't recovered from this horrible storm. Many still don't have homes. Many still haven't replaced the stuff that was lost. Many still haven't recovered from the grief of losing family. Florence hit America on September 14th, 2018 as a Category 4 hurricane and claimed the lives of 54 individuals and caused $24.23 billion in damage, mostly in North Carolina. Everyone in that storm is still there. They're still in those waist-high waters, breathing in that salty air, reliving every moment. For everyone who lost their lives that day, and for everyone who's lost their lives after the hurricane, due to relation to it, may you rest in peace. Nah, shit, really? I almost cried 2 times reading that. But yeah, that was my story of when I was in Hurricane Florence. Shortened down to avoid going into too much detail, of course. So yeah. Now, there is a bright side to the story, I guess you could say. There is technically a bright side to the story. Since I was in elementary at the time, I was in 5th grade, and our guidance counselor had been informed of my loss, and they were working alongside a group who built quilts for students who lost objects like material possession, to show them that people are there for them and people are with them through the entire thing. And they gave me a quilt I picked out, and I still have it today. And the quilt is a fishing quilt, because my grandpa loved fishing. And at the end of that month, the founder of that group came in, and every kid in the school, from kindergarten to 5th grade, was in the library listening to the leader speak. To my surprise, they asked me to come up and share my story. I did. And I was given another quilt that I lost. But they used me as an example, not to be greedy for what you have, and to spend more time with family. Not as happy as it sounds, but anyways, and that's all I got. So we'll end it here. Thank you guys for tuning in. Again, if you are not respectful in the comments, I will find you. Do not test me. So yeah. Ash, do you have any final words saying goodbye? Alright. Peace out, y'all.